I've spent 34 years playing the invisible, compliant workhorse of the Hudson family, but it took 250 of Savannah's wealthiest elites watching my sister brand me as damaged goods for our toxic legacy to finally burn to the ground. I was sitting in the darkest corner of her $200,000 wedding reception, clutching my terrified 6-year-old son's hand, while she held a microphone and gleefully called me a pathetic, unwanted single mother. Right on cue, echoing the cruelty, our mother chimed in from the head table, loudly labeling her own flesh and blood a second-hand item. They smiled, thinking they had orchestrated my ultimate public humiliation, completely unaware they had just handed the groom the matches to burn their entire high society empire to ashes. Subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you are watching this from. Let me back up and tell you exactly how the trap was set. The air in the third-floor attic of our Savannah, Georgia home was always thick. At 10 years old, I sat on the edge of a heavy, outdated bed that smelled faintly of mothballs, carefully copying my father's signature onto a school permission slip. Downstairs, the 5-bedroom Victorian house hummed with frantic, joyful life. My mother's heels clicked sharply across the hardwood floors. She was directing a team of hired decorators for my sister Sloane's 5th birthday party. "More balloons near the pool, and careful with the cake," my mother called out, her voice floating up the stairs. I pressed my pen harder into the paper, tracing my dad's looping H. In the Hudson family, there was a strict, unspoken code. Sloane was the princess. I was the workhorse. Even at 5, Sloane had a natural, effortless charm. She was a little brunette copy of our mother. She could break a vase, flash a teary smile, and suddenly it was a funny story to tell at dinner. I was the one who quietly made my own peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. I ran the washing machine by myself because my school uniforms would otherwise sit in a dark laundry basket for weeks. I learned early that being responsible just meant being invisible. If I didn't cause trouble, my parents didn't have to look my way. That invisible line between us only deepened as we grew. When Sloane's high school prom arrived, the house was a whirlwind of silk and hairspray. She spun in front of the hallway mirror in a $750 emerald green Giovanni gown. The hand-sewn beads caught the light like tiny green stars. A rented limousine idled in the driveway, its engine humming a low, rich note. My mother hovered behind her, tweaking a perfectly curled strand of hair, her eyes bright with absolute pride. I stood on the stairs, my hand resting on the cool wooden banister, watching them. 3 years earlier, on the day of my own prom, I had held up a simple dress from a department store clearance rack. It cost $48, 2 full months of my hard-earned dog-walking money. "Riley, you don't need all that flash," my mother had said that day, barely looking up from her magazine. She flipped a glossy page, not even pausing to look at my face. "You're the practical type, it suits you." I had driven myself to the dance in a beat-up Honda Civic, the engine rattling the whole way there. Our house was a physical map of their favoritism. Sloane claimed the master suite on the 2nd floor. She had a balcony overlooking the sparkling pool, white French provincial furniture, and silk curtains that draped from the ceiling like a royal tent. My room remained the drafty attic next to a dusty storage unit. In the sticky summer months, sweat glued my hair to my forehead. In the winter, the freezing wind made my window panes rattle like loose teeth. I didn't hate my sister. How could I? Sloane was just a kid playing the game our parents had set up. But late at night, staring up at the slanted attic ceiling, a cold knot would form in my stomach. I would lie there listening to the old house settle, and wonder what fundamental flaw lived inside my DNA. What is missing in me? I thought. Why do my own parents look right through me? I didn't know it then, but the quiet cruelty of those attic nights was just training. It was preparing me for the ultimate betrayal that would happen years later, under the bright, unforgiving lights of a 5-star ballroom. At 25, the ICU at Memorial Health was my entire world. It was a place of harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of sterile alcohol wipes, and the constant rhythmic beeping of heart monitors. As a nurse, my job was to watch for the tiny hidden signs of a failing body. I didn't realize I was completely blind to the signs of a failing life. That was when I met Brandon. He was a medical device rep, striding down the hospital corridors in tailored suits. He was charming, confident, and had a way of looking at me that made the chaotic emergency room fade into the background. After a lifetime of being a ghost in my own family's house, Brandon's intense focus felt like stepping out of a freezing room into warm sunlight. He saw me, or at least I thought he did. We married a year later. Our reception was held in a modest country club hall. My parents attended, but they moved through the room with tight, forced smiles, treating my wedding like an inconvenient networking event. While I sat at the sweetheart table in my white dress, nervously twisting my new ring, my mother stood near the bar with my aunts and uncles. She took a slow sip of her gin and tonic, her eyes darting past me to look at Sloane, who was laughing loudly with a groomsman. "Sloan is starting her internship at a top law firm in Atlanta next month," my mother announced, her voice pitched perfectly to cut through the music and reach my ears. "She's going places. Both my girls are doing well, of course. But Sloan, she's something special, a real star." I looked down at the white roses in my bouquet. A familiar hollow ache spread through my chest. Even today, even in a white gown, I was second best. The marriage unraveled the same way a patient crashes in the ICU. Not all at once, but system by system, boundary by boundary. Brandon had a terrifying gift for making me feel small. At first it was subtle, a slight frown at the clothes I wore. A heavy sigh when I came home exhausted from a 12-hour shift, smelling like bleach and exhaustion. Then came the isolation. He started picking fights right before I was supposed to meet my nursing friends, until I was too drained to go out at all. By the time I was 8 months pregnant, my world had shrunk to the size of our quiet house and the hospital. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday evening. The house was dead silent except for the drumming of the rain against the glass, and the hiss of the shower from the master bathroom. Brandon was inside, washing off the day. I was sitting heavily on the edge of our bed, rubbing my swollen belly, when his iPad lit up on the nightstand. Ping! The bright screen illuminated the dark room. I didn't mean to look, but my eyes caught the preview banner. It was from a woman named Chloe, his regional manager. "Can't stop thinking about the hotel in Dallas. Miss your hands." My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt. My training kicked in, the cold, detached focus of dealing with an emergency. My hands were shaking, but I picked up the glass screen. I unlocked it. I knew his simple passcode and scrolled. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, terrified drumbeat. Months of messages, pictures, inside jokes. He wasn't just working late. He was living a completely different life while I was building our child inside me. The shower water stopped abruptly. The bathroom door handle rattled. I dropped the iPad back onto the nightstand, my blood turning to ice water. The divorce was finalized when my son Leo was 16 months old. I was 28, entirely alone, and drowning. I picked up extra night shifts just to keep the lights on, leaving Leo sleeping in a crib at a 24-hour daycare that charged by the hour. I went to my parents' house to tell them the news. The massive Victorian felt even colder than I remembered. My father sat in his leather recliner, the volume on his golf tournament turned up loud. My mother sat on the velvet sofa, examining her freshly manicured nails. When I said the words, "Brandon and I are getting divorced," the silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. My mother didn't reach out to hug me. She didn't offer to babysit Leo. Instead, she let out a long, heavy sigh. She slowly crossed her legs, looking at me with a mixture of pity and deep disappointment. "I always worried you didn't know how to keep a man happy, Riley," she said, her voice smooth and careless. "You've always been too independent, too stubborn. Sloan would never let a man slip away like this." My father didn't even look away from the television. The soft thwack of a golf club hitting a ball echoed in the room. Sloan texted me exactly once during the grueling 6-month legal ordeal. I was sitting on the floor of my cramped one-bedroom apartment, staring at a stack of unpaid bills when my phone vibrated in the dark. "That sucks. But honestly, you always pick the wrong guys. Maybe try meditation." Stressed moms ruin their kids. No offer to bring over dinner. No asking how Leo was doing. Just a cold judgment sent through a screen. I didn't need their pity. I repeated that to myself every night, standing in my tiny kitchen under a flickering fluorescent bulb, heating up frozen pizza after a punishing shift. I would lean against the cheap laminate counter, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of Leo asleep in his crib in the corner of the room. He was my lifeline. The only pure thing in my world. I didn't need them to save me. I just needed them to stop using my broken heart as a mirror to admire their own perfection. Julian Vance entered the picture, 3 years before the wedding. Sloan had met him at a black tie gala benefiting animal shelters, a glittering event meant for photo ops and networking. He was a human rights attorney who took pro bono cases for families desperate for representation. Unlike the loud, boastful men my sister usually chased, Julian was handsome in a quiet, grounded way. He had kind eyes and a rare, startling habit of actually looking at you when you spoke. In my line of work, you learn to read people instantly. An ICU nurse can look at a patient's skin tone and breathing pattern and know exactly what is failing before the machines even sound an alarm. When I first met Julian at a Sunday family dinner, I watched him from across the massive mahogany table. I was waiting for the arrogance to show. I was waiting for the catch. But then Leo peeked out from behind my legs. My son was 3 then, painfully shy, used to being an afterthought in this house. Julian didn't just smile politely. He stopped mid-sentence, ignoring my mother's rambling story about her tennis club, and crouched all the way down to the hardwood floor. He didn't seem to care that the knees of his expensive tailored suit were touching the dust. "Hey buddy," Julian said, his voice dropping to a warm, even rumble. "I like your space shuttle shirt. Is that the Discovery?" Leo's eyes widened. He grabbed my pant leg tightly, but a tiny, brilliant smile broke across his face. Instantly he came out of his shell, babbling about rockets. No one in my family ever gave Leo that kind of targeted, genuine attention. My heart did a strange, painful flutter. Throughout the dinner, the dining room felt suffocatingly warm. The smell of roasted lamb and heavy wine hung in the air. I kept my head down, eating quietly, but I caught Julian watching our family dynamics. He had a lawyer's observant, analytical eye, picking apart the room like a witness stand. He noticed the micro-expressions. He saw the way my mother instantly talked over me when I tried to answer a question, loudly redirecting the conversation back to Sloane's new car. He noticed my father laughing boisterously at Sloane's jokes while ignoring mine entirely. And when dinner finished, he watched me automatically stand up, like a well-trained servant. I began gathering the heavy, grease-smeared ceramic plates, stacking them on my arm. Sloane remained in her chair, scrolling through her phone. "Ugh, I'm too full to move," she complained, not even glancing at the mess in front of her. Julian's jaw tightened subtly. Just a tiny flex of the muscle, but I saw it. Later that night, the Savannah air was damp and cold. I was standing in the dark driveway, shivering in a thin cardigan, fighting with Leo's stroller. The rusty latch wouldn't fold. My shift at the hospital started in 5 hours. My feet throbbed, and the heavy diaper bag kept slipping off my shoulder. I yanked at the stroller frame, fighting back a sudden overwhelming wave of exhausted tears. Suddenly a shadow fell over me. Julian stepped out of the dark, the gravel crunching softly under his shoes. Without a word, he reached out and took the heavy diaper bag off my shoulder. The sudden relief of weight almost made me stumble. "Does your family always treat you like that?" he asked quietly. I froze. The cold night air seemed to stop moving. "Like what?" I asked, my voice defensive, my walls slamming up instantly. "Like you're the hired help." I forced a dry, unnatural laugh. The metallic clinking of my car keys echoed loudly in the quiet driveway. "That's just how we are. Sloane's the star. I'm the supporting cast. It's fine, Julian." He didn't laugh. He just stood there holding my bag, looking at me with something unreadable and heavy in his expression. The porch light cast long, tense shadows across his face. "You're a good mother, Riley," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Leo is lucky to have you. Don't let them make you feel otherwise." He placed the bag gently in the trunk, turned and walked back into the brightly lit house. I stood alone in the dark, my hands trembling. I didn't understand why those simple words felt like a knife twisting in my chest, or why I cried the entire drive back to my tiny apartment, my vision blurring against the streetlights. Over the next 2.5 years, I watched Julian's patience with my family begin to fray. The tension built slowly, like pressure in a sealed tank. The breaking point, the one I should have paid more attention to, happened at Thanksgiving dinner, 6 months before the wedding. We were eating dessert when Sloane scoffed, swirling her wine glass. "I don't know how you stand that depressing little apartment, Riley," she sneered in front of the whole table. "The carpets smell like old soup. It's embarrassing." The dining room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I looked down at my plate, my cheeks burning with hot humiliation, preparing to swallow the insult like I always did. Clack. Julian dropped his silver fork onto his china plate. The sound was as sharp as a gunshot. "I think Riley's place is warm and full of love," Julian said. His voice wasn't raised, but it was hard as stone. He stared directly at Sloane. "It takes an incredible amount of strength to raise a child alone while saving lives at a hospital. I respect it immensely." Sloane's mouth opened in shock. She rolled her eyes, her face flushing red. "God, Julian, you're too sensitive." My mother quickly clapped her hands, forcing a high-pitched, nervous laugh. "Anyway, let's talk about the floral arrangements for the wedding." I slipped out to use the restroom a few minutes later. As I walked down the dim, carpeted hallway, I heard sharp, angry whispers coming from the study. I stopped, holding my breath, pressing my back against the cold wall. "You don't talk to her like that," Julian hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. "I won't sit there and watch you bully your own sister, Sloane." "She's fine," Sloane hissed back. "It's just a joke," Stop analyzing my family. I didn't hear the rest of the words. I just saw Julian step out into the hallway a moment later, the tension radiating from his clenched jaw. He was already seeing the cracks in her perfect glossy facade. I just didn't realize how close the glass was to shattering completely. The wedding invitation arrived 3 weeks later. I found it shoved into the dented metal mailbox of my apartment building, resting on top of a past-due electric bill. It was a heavy navy blue envelope sealed with silver wax. The calligraphy on the front was so thick and raised you could feel the loops under your fingertips. It felt less like a celebration and more like a royal summons. Sloane Elizabeth Hudson and Julian Thomas Vance request the pleasure of your company. The venue was the St. Regis, a 5-star hotel in downtown Savannah with soaring ceilings, a place that regularly hosted state senators and celebrities. The estimated budget was $200,000, funded entirely by my parents. They had quietly taken out a second mortgage on the Victorian house to afford it. My mother complained about the bank loan endlessly to her friends, but always finished by saying Sloane deserved nothing but the absolute best. I stood in my tiny kitchen, the hum of the cheap refrigerator buzzing in my ears, holding the heavy cardstock. For context, when I got married, my parents contributed exactly $1,500. They brought up that generous gift at every Thanksgiving for 4 years. I traced the silver letters of Sloane's name, feeling a familiar heavy exhaustion settle into my bones. The invitation came with strict unspoken rules, which Sloane made clear a few nights later. I was folding Leo's tiny socks on the sofa, enjoying the rare silence of the apartment, when my phone vibrated. Sloane's name flashed on the screen. A knot of dread instantly tightened my stomach. In my line of work, a late-night phone call never brings good news. Riley. Her voice came through the speaker. It was syrupy and bright, but tight with an underlying anxiety. I need to discuss a few things about the wedding. Of course, I said softly, not wanting to wake Leo in the next room. What's up? First, it's about your outfit. There was a deliberate, unnatural pause. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background of her massive bedroom. Please wear something understated. Grays or beige only. I've hired a very specific, very expensive videographer. I don't want anyone drawing attention away from me or clashing with the aesthetic. You understand, right? I looked toward my closet door. Hanging on the outside handle was a beautiful deep red cocktail dress. I had saved my extra overtime pay for 3 months to buy it. It was the first piece of clothing in years that didn't look like a pair of hospital scrubs or sweatpants. It was the first dress that made me feel pretty, that made me feel like a woman instead of just a tired nurse. I swallowed the heavy lump in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut. Okay, I can do that, Sloane. I'll find something gray. Good. She let out a breath, and I could hear the annoyance already building in her tone. Second, do you really have to bring Leo? The silence that followed was freezing. My fingers gripped the edge of the cheap coffee table. He's your nephew, Sloane. And he's 6. I know how old he is. She snapped, the fake sweetness completely vanishing. But he's a child. He'll probably get fussy and ruin the ceremony. You know how kids are. They're loud. They ruin the vibe. Sloane, I don't have anyone to watch him. I kept my voice perfectly level, the same tone I used when calming down a panicked patient. Brandon hasn't seen Leo in over a year, and I can't afford a specialized overnight sitter for a whole weekend at a hotel. Ugh, fine. She sighed heavily. It was a dramatic, suffering sound, as if my lack of money was a personal attack against her perfect day. But keep him completely quiet. I've put you at a table in the back. That way you can take him out quickly if he makes even a tiny scene. Don't make me regret this, Riley. The line went dead. The morning of the wedding was a blur of nervous energy. I was wrestling Leo into his little charcoal suit vest when my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. Riley, I don't have much time, she said breathlessly. In the background I could hear the chaotic sounds of a hotel suite, hair dryers, clinking glasses, and people shouting orders. I've spoken with the event coordinator. You and the boy are at table 28. Table 28? I asked, pinning Leo's collar down. Yes, it's near the kitchen entrance. Don't make a fuss about it when you get there. The front tables are for Julian's partners and the extended family. Her tone was clipped, entirely devoid of warmth. This is Sloane's big day, Riley. We can't have any distractions. Distractions? That is what my 6-year-old son, her own flesh and blood grandson, was to them. A distraction. A nuisance to be hidden away in the shadows. I should have seen it then. The deliberate setup. The careful, calculated orchestration of my isolation. The trap was being laid right in front of me, piece by piece. But I didn't see it. I was just so blindingly tired from working a 12-hour shift the day before. All I wanted was to survive the day, eat a slice of cake, and take my son home to our safe, quiet little apartment. I looked at the cheap, scratchy gray dress I had pulled from a clearance rack the day before. I slipped it over my head, feeling entirely invisible. The St. Regis ballroom was breathtaking, but in a way that made me feel like I was suffocating. The moment we stepped through the heavy oak double doors, the scent of expensive perfume and hundreds of fresh white lilies hit me like a physical wall. Above us, soaring ceilings dripped with massive crystal chandeliers. They cast a cold, brilliant light over the room. In the center of the floor stood a towering ice sculpture of two swans, slowly melting onto a silver tray. In the far corner, a string quartet was playing a flawless, haunting Bach melody. It was the kind of wedding you see in glossy bridal magazines, the kind that makes guests whisper behind their hands about how lucky and wealthy the couple must be. I stood at the edge of the room in my scratchy charcoal gray dress. I looked exactly how Sloane wanted me to look. Forgettable, faded, blending into the shadows. Beside me, Leo looked adorable in his little matching vest and slacks. His hair was neatly combed, and his small hand gripped mine with an iron tightness as we stared at the overwhelming opulence. "Mommy, it's so pretty," he whispered. His big brown eyes were wide, reflecting the sparkling chandeliers. "Are we sitting with Grandma?" I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. "It is pretty, baby. Let's go find our table." Table 28 was exactly where my mother had promised. It was a physical representation of my place in this family, tucked in the absolute farthest, darkest corner of the massive room, half hidden behind a thick marble pillar. It was so close to the kitchen doors that every time they swung open on their metal hinges, a rush of hot air and the loud clatter of dirty dishes drowned out the string quartet. Our table mates were distant cousins I had maybe met twice in my life, and two of Sloane's junior co-workers who clearly hadn't rated a better seat. We all exchanged tight, uncomfortable smiles. No one from my immediate family came over to say hello. I sat in my chair, smoothing my cheap dress over my knees, and watched my parents make their grand entrance. My mother floated into the room in a champagne-colored Oscar de la Renta gown that caught the light with every step. My father walked beside her in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit. They worked the room like seasoned politicians. They hugged the wealthy partners from Julian's law firm, laughed loudly with city council members, and graciously accepted compliments about their beautiful singular daughter. Not once did their eyes drift toward the dark corner by the kitchen. Sloane swept in 45 minutes later. She wore a Monique Louhier gown that probably cost more than my annual rent. Layers of silk and lace trailed behind her. She was radiant, glowing under the spotlights, every inch the untouchable princess she had always been. As she walked, her eyes scanned the crowd. She bypassed the front tables, looking past the cheering guests, until her gaze locked onto the shadows of table 28. Until she found me. She smiled. In my years in the ICU, I've seen all kinds of smiles. Relieved smiles, grateful smiles, brave smiles. Sloane's smile was none of those. It was a calculating, predatory tightening of the lips. It was the smile of a hunter who has spent months laying a trap in the dark, finally watching the cage door snap shut. On her way to the elevated head table, she changed her path, her heavy silk train dragging across the marble floor as she walked straight toward our corner. "Riley," she said, stopping right behind my chair. The heavy smell of her expensive floral perfume washed over me. "You actually came." I kept my voice carefully neutral. "Of course I came, Sloane. You're my sister." She didn't reply to that. Instead, she slowly lowered her gaze to Leo, who was sitting quietly, using a red crayon to color on a white paper napkin. Sloane's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just remember what I said on the phone," she said, her voice dropping to a smooth, icy whisper that the other guests at the table couldn't hear. "Keep him completely quiet. I don't want a single sound." Before I could answer, she turned and was instantly swallowed by a crowd of adoring bridesmaids. My hands were shaking under the table. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to slow my racing heart. I leaned forward to grab a glass of water. That was when I saw it. My mother had stopped by our table a few minutes earlier to drop off her purse, too busy talking to a waiter to carry it. Her phone rested carelessly on the edge of the tablecloth. Just as I reached for my water, the screen lit up with a silent notification. "Sloane, remember the plan?" My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. A sudden, violent wave of nausea hit me. My medical instincts flared up instantly. When a patient's monitor shows a sudden drop in blood pressure, you don't ignore it. You look for the internal bleeding. My brain was screaming that there was a hidden danger in this room, a fatal complication I couldn't see yet. But I pushed the panic down. I forced myself to look away from the screen. You're just exhausted, I told myself. You're being paranoid. I was wrong. The ceremony itself was flawless. Sloane cried delicate, perfect tears that didn't smudge her makeup as she stood under a massive floral arch and exchanged vows with Julian. My parents beamed from the front row, holding hands. The guests dabbed at their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. I sat in the very back, Leo on my lap, and tried desperately to feel happy for her. I really tried, but sitting in the shadows, listening to them talk about unconditional love, I just felt entirely hollow. An hour later, during the cocktail reception, the string quartet switched to a lively, upbeat tune. The expensive wedding photographer, a woman with 2 large cameras strapped to her chest, began gathering the family near the floral arch for official portraits. "Immediate family next, please," the photographer called out, waving her hand. "Parents and siblings of the bride." I felt a tiny spark of hope. I stood up, smoothing down my gray dress, and gently took Leo's hand. "Come on, buddy," I whispered. "Time for a picture." We had barely taken 3 steps out of the shadows when my mother appeared out of nowhere. She moved with shocking speed, stepping directly into my path. She didn't say a word at first. She just pressed her flat palm firmly against my chest, physically stopping me from walking any further into the light. "Just the immediate family for this set, Riley," she said. Her voice was low, tight, and completely unyielding. "Parents of the bride." I blinked, looking over her shoulder at Sloane and Julian posing under the flowers. "Mom, I'm her sister. I am immediate family." My mother's eyes were cold and flat. She didn't flinch. "We're doing a smaller, tighter grouping first. Aesthetically, it just looks much better for the album without clutter. You understand? Clutter." I understood perfectly. I always understood. The heavy, invisible weight of my childhood settled back onto my shoulders. I took a slow step back, retreating into the shadows near the kitchen doors. Leo tugged hard at my sleeve. His lower lip was trembling slightly, his big eyes shining with unshed tears. "Mommy," his voice broke, small and confused. "Why can't we be in the picture? Grandma didn't even say hi to me. Did I do something wrong?" My heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. I couldn't breathe. I dropped to my knees right there on the carpet, uncaring about the dust, until I was exactly at his eye level. I gripped his small, warm shoulders. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. You are perfect," I choked out. I reached into my small purse with a shaking hand and pulled out my phone. I forced the widest, brightest smile I could muster, fighting back the burning tears that threatened to spill over my eyelashes. "We'll take our own pictures later," I promised him, my voice cracking. "Just you and me. The best team. Now smile for Mommy." I held up the phone. In the background of the screen, my family laughed perfectly under the bright lights, completely forgetting we existed. The reception dinner felt like a slow, beautifully decorated nightmare. I watched from the shadows of table 28 as aunts, uncles, and family friends I had known my entire life walked past us. They marched up to the elevated head table to shake hands with Julian and kiss Sloane's cheek. Not a single person walked back toward the kitchen doors to say hello to me. I focused on cutting Leo's chicken, my movements mechanical and precise. "Riley? Is that you back here?" I looked up. Aunt Margot, my mother's younger sister, was standing near our table. She was gripping a glass of white wine so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes darted nervously between me, Leo, and the kitchen doors, as if she was afraid of being caught talking to us. She nervously twisted the heavy pearl ring on her right hand. "The seating chart's creative," I said quietly. I forced a light, easy tone into my voice so I wouldn't cry in front of her. Aunt Margot glanced toward the head table. My mother was holding court, laughing loudly, a glass of champagne in the air. A shadow of deep, uneasy guilt flickered across Margot's face. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a hurried whisper. "Patricia's always had her preferences," Margot said, her eyes sad and apologetic. "I'm sorry, honey. You look beautiful. Truly." Before I could even say thank you, she turned and hurried away toward the bar, eager to escape the suffocating awkwardness of my presence. I watched her go, a cold, heavy stone settling in my stomach. A few feet away, at the edge of the polished wooden dance floor, I noticed Julian's best friend, Caleb. He was setting up his phone on a tall black tripod. He adjusted the angle, pointing the camera perfectly toward the main stage and the head table. A tiny red light began to blink on the screen. I knew from the wedding program that he was live streaming the entire reception for Julian's extended family in California, who couldn't fly out due to health reasons. I didn't think much of the blinking red light then. I had no idea that small glass lens was about to become the ultimate witness to my family's complete unraveling. Suddenly, the sharp clinking of silverware against crystal silenced the massive ballroom. The MC, a polished man in a dark three-piece suit, stepped up to the microphone stand on the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, the beautiful bride would like to say a few words." A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. Sloane rose from her velvet chair. She stepped into the glow of a dozen bright spotlights, radiant and victorious. She took the microphone with practiced ease, her diamond Cartier bracelet flashing under the lights. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Sloane began. Her voice was honey-sweet, amplified and echoing perfectly through the massive speakers hidden around the room. "This is the happiest day of my life, and I am so deeply grateful to share it with everyone I love." She turned to smile at Julian. He was watching her, but his posture was strange. In the ICU, you learn to read body language before a patient even speaks. Julian was sitting rigidly upright. His jaw was locked and his hands were folded so tightly on the white tablecloth that his skin looked stretched. "First, I want to thank my incredible parents," Sloane continued, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical emotion. "Mom, Dad, you've given me everything. Your love, your endless support, your belief in me. I am exactly who I am because of you." At the head table, my mother pressed a manicured hand over her heart, performing her mother of the bride tears for the wealthy crowd. My father nodded proudly, raising his glass. "And I want to talk about family," Sloane said. The tone of her voice shifted. It wasn't a subtle change. The honey sweetness instantly drained out, replaced by a sharp, icy edge. In my chest, my heart gave a sudden hard thump. The hairs on the back of my arms stood up. "I want to talk about what family really means," Sloane said, gripping the microphone tighter. "About the important life lessons I've learned from watching everyone around me." Her eyes swept over the room. She bypassed the senators, the wealthy lawyers, the country club friends. Her gaze cut through the dark room like a searchlight, until it landed directly on me, sitting in the shadows by the kitchen doors. The warmth in her expression vanished completely, replaced by pure unadulterated malice. "Especially my sister." Beside me, Leo perked up. His little legs kicked excitedly under the table. He tugged my sleeve. "Mommy, Aunt Sloane is talking about you." "I know, baby," I whispered. "Shh." My blood ran cold. My medical training told me my body was going into a state of shock, adrenaline dumping into my bloodstream, my breathing turning shallow and fast. Something in Sloane's eyes told me this was a trap, and the door had just locked behind me. "Riley, could you stand up?" Sloane called out. Her amplified voice was no longer a request, it was a demand for compliance. "I want everyone to see you." 250 faces turned toward the dark corner of the room. The silence in the ballroom suddenly felt incredibly heavy, thick enough to choke on. My legs felt like they were filled with wet concrete. I didn't want to stand. My instincts screamed at me to grab Leo and run. But the pressure of 500 eyes pinned me to my chair. I didn't want to cause a scene and ruin her wedding. So slowly, my hands shaking, I stood up. "There she is," Sloane said. A cruel, satisfied smirk played on her painted lips. "My big sister. The one who taught me so many valuable lessons about life. See everyone, my sister Riley is a single mother." The words hung in the air. Sharp, deliberate, entirely out of place for a wedding toast. A few guests at the nearby tables shifted uncomfortably in their seats. People started exchanging confused, wide-eyed glances. But Sloane's smile didn't waver. She was basking in the blinding spotlight. She got married young, had a baby, and then, well, things didn't work out. Sloane tilted her head, dripping with mock theatrical sympathy. Her husband left her. Couldn't handle it, I guess. And now she's all alone. From a table near the front stage, a few of Sloane's old sorority sisters let out a scattered, nervous giggle. But the rest of the massive room didn't laugh. The air felt completely sucked out of the ballroom. I felt my face flush with a hot, burning humiliation. I was entirely exposed. "My sister is unwanted," Sloane continued, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers in the dead silence. "No man wants her. I mean, can you blame them? She's got baggage now. A kid, hospital bills, that whole depressing mess." More giggles from her friends. A few of her wealthy co-workers joined in, assuming this was some sort of edgy, inside joke roast. But the vast majority of the 250 guests were sitting perfectly still, trapped in a stunned, horrified silence. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there in my cheap clearance rack dress, watching my own sister tear me apart for sport. And then, cutting through the suffocating quiet of the room, my mother's voice rang out from the head table. Loud, cheerful, projecting to the back of the room. She's a second-hand item. There was no roaring laughter from the crowd. Real life isn't a sitcom. Instead, a collective, highly audible gasp rippled through the massive ballroom. The sound of silverware dropping against plates clattered in the silence. Did her mother really just say that? Someone whispered fiercely from the table next to mine. Oh my God. But at the head table, my mother was chuckling. She looked around the room, a bright smile on her face, actually waiting for applause. My father was looking down at his lap, hiding his face like a coward, but I could see his shoulders shaking with silent amusement. Emboldened by my mother, Sloane's friends at the front tables started laughing out loud. I looked down at Leo. His small innocent face was crumpled with intense confusion and raw fear. His brown eyes darted between me, the whispering strangers, and his grandmother sitting at the front of the room. Mommy. His voice was a tiny shaking whisper. He grabbed my hand, his small fingers digging into my skin. Why's Grandma saying mean things? My vision was swimming, but I saw it clearly. Sloane was holding a stack of thick white index cards in her hand. They were typed, prepared, rehearsed. This wasn't an orchestrated execution, a coordinated psychological ambush disguised as a wedding toast. But you know what? Sloane was saying into the microphone, completely ignoring the deeply uncomfortable, horrified energy radiating from the crowd. Riley taught me a truly valuable lesson. She showed me exactly what not to do with my life. So really I should thank her. She raised her crystal champagne glass high in the air, pointing it like a weapon toward my dark corner. To Riley, Sloane announced smoothly. My cautionary tale. No one raised their glasses. The silence was deafening, heavy and absolute. The few people who had been laughing suddenly stopped, realizing the entire room was against them. And my 6-year-old son watched his mother stand there paralyzed and broken, completely unable to defend herself. Sloane wasn't finished. She was determined to deliver every single line she had practiced in the mirror. You know, growing up, everyone always asked why Riley and I were so different, she said, pacing the stage slowly. Same parents, same house, same opportunities. But Sloane succeeded, and Riley, well, she gestured vaguely in my direction with a look of pure disgust. Poor Riley, always struggling. Poor Riley, can't keep a man. Poor Riley stuck in that sad little apartment with her sad little life. At the head table, my mother nodded along, taking a slow sip of her wine. A look of profound, chilling satisfaction rested on her face. Some people are just meant to be warnings, not examples, Sloane concluded, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. And my sister, she's the best warning I could ask for. She lowered the microphone and waited for the applause. A few of her bridesmaids clapped awkwardly. The sound echoed hollowly, a lonely, pathetic noise in the vast ballroom. I felt Leo's hand tighten desperately around mine. His whole tiny body was trembling against my leg. Mommy, I want to go, he whimpered, hot tears finally spilling down his cheeks and dripping onto his little charcoal vest. Please, I'm scared. I know, baby, I whispered, my voice cracking into jagged pieces. I know, but my legs refused to move. I was pinned under the terrible weight of 250 judging, pitying eyes. Honestly, Mom's right, Sloane laughed, breaking the awful silence one last time, her voice dripping with venom. Riley is a second-hand item, damaged goods. But hey, at least she's here to see how a real success story ends. For 10 agonizing seconds, the ballroom was entirely paralyzed. The air was thick, smelling sickeningly of roasted meat, expensive champagne, and those heavy white lilies. I stood perfectly still, clutching my crying son against my cheap dress, waiting for the floor to open up and swallow me. And then, movement from the elevated head table broke the spell. Screech. The sound of heavy oak legs scraping violently against the polished marble floor echoed through the dead-silent room like a gunshot. Julian had pushed his chair back. He stood up. In the ICU, right before a patient's heart stops, there is a specific kind of stillness on the monitor. A tightening. Julian's body possessed that exact same terrifying stillness. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles twitched under his skin, but his eyes weren't looking at Sloane, who was still standing center stage, smiling proudly at her own cruel joke. His eyes were fixed entirely on table 28. On the dark corner, on Leo's small shaking form pressed desperately against my leg. For a wild, panicked second, I thought Julian was going to turn around and walk out the side exit. I thought he was going to escape the embarrassment. Instead, he stepped out from behind the head table and walked directly toward the stage, toward his bride, toward the microphone. He moved with absolute terrifying purpose. His polished Oxford shoes clicked sharply against the marble. Click, click, click. The sound cut through the murmuring crowd. The whispers in the room died instantly. Sloane's confident smile finally flickered. A tiny wrinkle of confusion appeared on her perfect forehead. Julianne? Baby. What are you? He didn't answer. He didn't even look at her face. He reached the stage in 6 long strides, stepping up into the harsh glare of the spotlights. Sloane was still holding the microphone loosely in her manicured hand, her Cartier bracelet glittering. Julianne, sit down, she hissed under her breath, a nervous edge creeping into her tone. I'm not finished with my... He reached out and took the microphone from her hand. He didn't snatch it aggressively. He didn't yell, but he removed it from her grip with a cold, authoritative finality that left absolutely no room for argument. A brief, sharp whine of audio feedback pierced the speakers, making a few guests in the front row flinch. Julianne? Sloane's voice pitched high, raw panic finally breaking through her glossy facade. What are you doing? Give that back. The ballroom held its breath. 250 people sat frozen in their seats. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother half rise from her velvet chair at the head table. The smug, victorious smirk was completely wiped from her face. It was replaced by a sudden, wide-eyed realization that she had just lost control of the room. Julian raised the heavy black microphone to his lips. I apologize to all of you for the disruption to your evening, he said. His voice wasn't yelling, but it was incredibly deep, steady, and vibrating with a suppressed righteous fury. It echoed through the massive speakers, filling every corner of the room. But there is something I need to address right now. Immediately. He turned slowly to look at me in the shadows. Really look at me. His eyes were no longer analytical. They were filled with profound sorrow, regret, and deep respect. I felt a tear finally break loose, tracing a hot path down my freezing cheek. Then Julian turned back to face the sea of wealthy guests. Over the past 3 years, Julian began, his voice ringing like a judge delivering a final verdict. I have watched how this family treats Riley Hudson. I have sat through dinners where she is mocked. I have seen holidays where she is deliberately excluded. I have argued with my fiancé behind closed doors about the toxic, cruel way she speaks about her own sister. And every single time I was told I was overreacting. I was told it was just... She grabbed at his arm, her acrylic nails digging desperately into the dark fabric of his tailored suit jacket. Julian, stop it. You're embarrassing me. Everyone is staring. He shrugged her off with a sharp twist of his shoulder, stepping away as if her touch physically burned him. No, Sloane, he said smoothly, the microphone catching every icy syllable. You did this to yourself. Julian squared his shoulders to the crowd. I am a human rights attorney. I have dedicated my entire professional career to protecting children from abusive environments. I spend my days fighting for kids who suffer from severe family trauma, who are broken by adults who weaponize their power against the vulnerable. He lifted his hand and pointed a long finger directly past the ice sculpture, past the crystal centerpieces, right toward our dark table, toward Leo, who was now burying his face into the fabric of my cheap gray dress, sobbing silently. That little boy sitting in the dark is 6 years old. 6. Julian's voice cracked, just once, betraying the intense emotion boiling underneath. And you just stood on a stage, in a $10,000 dress, and made him watch you tear his mother to shreds for your own sick entertainment. A woman in the 3rd row let out a muffled sob, covering her mouth with her hand. Julian didn't stop. He turned his blazing eyes toward the head table. You called her unwanted. You called her damaged goods. He locked eyes with my mother. And Patricia, you called your own flesh-and-blood daughter a second-hand item. My mother flinched violently, as if he had slapped her across the face. The blood drained entirely from her cheeks, leaving her pale and sickly under the lights. My father was staring down at his empty china plate, his hands shaking, praying the floor would swallow him whole. In front of her child, Julian repeated, his voice dropping to a harsh, disgusted whisper that somehow filled the entire room. The silence that followed was ringing. It was absolute devastation. I have spent my life fighting against exactly this kind of cruelty, Julian continued, his chest heaving slightly under his white shirt. This wasn't a joke. This was an ambush. And I absolutely cannot bind my life, my name, or my future children to a family that operates this way. I have been blind to just how deep this rot goes. But I see it clearly tonight. He turned slowly to face Sloane. She was trembling violently. Her perfect, expensive makeup suddenly looked garish and clownish under the harsh white spotlights. Her carefully crafted, untouchable facade was crumbling into fine dust right in front of Savannah's elite. "Julian, please," she begged. She didn't realize the microphone was still catching her desperate, breathless whisper. "Please don't do this to me. We can talk about it in the back. It was just a stupid speech. I'll apologize." "It was who you really are," he said coldly. He took a long step back from her, creating a massive, highly visible chasm between them on the stage. "I can't marry you, Sloane. I am done." The collective gasp from the 250 guests hit the air like a physical shockwave. "And one more thing," Julian added. His eyes scanned the edge of the polished dance floor until they found the tall black tripod. He stared directly at the tiny blinking red light on Caleb's phone. He addressed the camera with a calm, deliberate focus. "Caleb has been live streaming this reception for my family in California," Julian said to the lens. "Mom, Dad, I am so sorry you had to see this tonight, but at least you know exactly what kind of family I am walking away from." He didn't drop the microphone. He didn't throw it. He simply bent down and placed it on the wooden stage floor. It landed with a soft, heavy, final thud. "I am deeply sorry for the disruption to your evening," Julian said, raising his voice one last time to address the stunned, unmoving crowd. "The bar is still open. I suggest you all go home." Then, without looking back at the sobbing woman in the white dress, Julian Vance turned, walked down the stage steps, and headed straight for the grand exit doors. In the ICU, right after a patient flatlines, there is exactly 1 second of absolute terrifying silence. It is the breath before the storm. Then, the alarms shriek, the nurses rush in, and absolute chaos takes over the room. The ballroom had that exact same second of silence. Then, the dam broke. The heavy, suffocating scent of the white lilies suddenly smelled rancid to me, like wilting flowers in a sick room. 250 guests erupted into loud, frantic whispers. Chairs scraped against the marble floor. People were standing up, putting on coats, their faces pale with shock. At the center of the room, the ice sculpture of the two swans was melting rapidly, water dripping onto the silver tray like a ticking clock. Drip, drip, drip. "Riley." The sharp, ugly scream cut through the noise. I turned. My mother was on her feet. Her champagne-colored gown swirled furiously around her ankles as she stormed away from the head table, charging directly toward our dark corner. She moved like a hurricane. I pulled Leo onto my lap, wrapping both of my arms tightly around his small body. I could feel his heart hammering against my chest like a trapped bird. My own breathing was shallow and fast, but my mind went totally clinically cold. When my mother reached our table, her face was completely unrecognizable. The polished, perfect society woman was gone. Her features were twisted with a rage so raw and ugly it made me physically lean back. The veins in her neck strained against her diamond necklace. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown dark. She wasn't furious at Sloane for her cruel speech. She wasn't humiliated by her own horrible words. She was furious at me. I was the target, just like I had always been. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. She jabbed a manicured finger just inches from my face. I could see the tiny tremor in her hand. "What did you say to Julian before the wedding? You ruined your sister's life." I stared at her. My chest ached with a sudden, overwhelming grief. Not for the mother standing in front of me, but for the mother I realized I was never going to have. "Mom, I didn't do anything," I said, my voice eerily flat. "He reacted to what you and Sloane just did on that stage. You've always been jealous of her," my mother shrieked. She didn't care who heard her. Guests were openly holding up their phones now, recording her meltdown. "You couldn't stand to see her marry a wealthy, successful man while you have absolutely nothing. You poisoned him against her, didn't you? You told him lies." On the stage behind her, Sloane had collapsed into a sobbing heap. Her wails echoed through the microphone she had knocked over. Her perfect $200,000 day had shattered into a very public nightmare. My father appeared at my mother's side. His face was blotchy and red with panic. He was sweating, breathing heavily through his mouth. He looked old, suddenly, incredibly old and weak. "What did you tell him, Riley?" my father demanded, his voice shaking. He looked frantically at the exit doors, then back at me. "Behind our backs, tell me." He wouldn't just leave a wedding over a simple joke. "It wasn't a joke, Dad," I said. My hands tightened around Leo. "You humiliated me in front of my own son. You laughed at me. Liar." Sloane screamed from the main stage, her voice cracking, entirely raw. She was pointing at me from the floor. You've been trying to turn him against me for months. You ruin everything you touch, Riley." I looked around the massive room. The wealthy politicians, the lawyers, the country club friends, they weren't laughing anymore. They were staring at us with a mixture of horror, pity, and deep disgust. Some were already rushing out the side doors. In that moment, a strange, powerful shift happened inside my brain. I could see all the paths laying out in front of me. If I stayed and argued, if I screamed back to defend myself, I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would play the role they had assigned me, the crazy, jealous, difficult sister causing a scene. I looked down at Leo. He was hyperventilating, his small fists balled tight against my dress. He was terrified of the screaming, terrified of the angry faces of his own grandparents. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about him. For 34 years I had stayed quiet to keep the peace. I had absorbed their insults to buy their crumbs of affection. I had let them treat me like a placeholder. But standing there, feeling the weight of my tired bones and the heavy reality of my lonely life, the last frayed thread tying me to this family quietly snapped. I stood up straight. I smoothed down my cheap, scratchy gray dress. I reached down and lifted my 6-year-old son into my arms, holding him tight against my chest. He buried his face in my neck, his tears soaking my collar. "I didn't say a single word to Julian," I said. My voice was completely unnervingly calm. The quiet certainty in my tone seemed to unnerve my mother more than shouting ever could. She took a tiny step back. "I didn't need to say anything," I continued, looking my parents dead in the eyes. "He has eyes. He's watched you treat me like garbage for 3 years. And tonight he finally realized that if he married Sloane, he'd be bringing that exact same poison into his own home. You did this to yourselves." My mother's mouth opened and closed, completely unable to form words. The shock of my defiance temporarily paralyzed her. "You're dead to me, Riley," Sloane screamed from the stage, her voice tearing. I didn't even look her way. I turned my back on them. "Riley, you come back here," my mother shrieked, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "You apologize to your sister right now. Don't you walk away from me." I kept walking. The distance from table 28 to the heavy brass exit doors was about 50 feet. It felt like walking through deep water. The remaining guests parted like the Red Sea, stepping out of my way, their eyes following me as I carried my crying child out of the wreckage of my family. I pushed through the grand doors into the hotel lobby. The air out here was cool, quiet, and smelled of lemon polish instead of dying flowers. I saw Julian standing near the revolving front doors. He was holding his dark coat over his arm, waiting. When he saw me walking toward him, the tension in his shoulders dropped slightly. He stepped forward. "Riley," Julian said. His professional, polished voice was entirely gone, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. "I am so incredibly sorry. I should have spoken up at that Thanksgiving dinner. I should have ended it then. I let myself be manipulated by her." "Don't apologize to me," I said quietly, shifting Leo's weight on my tired hip. The muscles in my arms burned, but I didn't put my son down. "You just saved my boy from growing up thinking it's normal for a family to treat people this way. That's more than anyone in my bloodline has ever done for him." Julian's eyes softened. He reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, beautifully embossed business card. "Julian Vance, attorney at law. Human and children's rights. If they come after you," he said firmly, pressing the heavy card into my free hand. He looked at me with an intense protective focus. "If they try to harass you, or if your ex-husband ever resurfaces and tries to use this chaos against you for custody, you call me, pro bono. I will protect you and Leo. I mean it, Riley." I looked down at the silver lettering on the card, then back up at his face. "Thank you, Julian." I turned and pushed through the revolving glass doors, stepping out into the cool, damp Savannah night. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the hotel vanished, replaced by the smell of wet pavement and car exhaust. It was the best thing I had ever smelled. As we stood on the curb waiting for our cheap Uber, Leo slowly lifted his head from my shoulder. His eyes were red and puffy. "Mommy," he whispered into the quiet night. "Are you sad?" I closed my eyes. I took a deep, freezing breath of the night air. I searched my heart, digging past the exhaustion and the years of rejection, expecting to find absolute devastation. Instead, I found a vast, glowing lightness. The cage door was open. "No, baby," I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "I'm not sad. I feel free." Leo wiped his nose with his small fist. "Can we have pancakes when we get home?" I kissed the top of his head. "With double chocolate chips, all the chocolate chips you want." The drive back to our apartment was silent. The city lights of Savannah flashed across the back window of the Uber, washing over Leo's sleeping face. By the time I carried him up the 2 flights of stairs to our place, my arms were shaking with exhaustion. Our apartment was small, and the carpets were worn, but as I locked the deadbolt behind us, the silence felt like medicine. I bathed Leo in warm water, watching the tension finally leave his little shoulders. I made him the double chocolate chip pancakes I promised, cutting them into tiny uneven squares under the flickering kitchen light. I tucked him into his bed, placing his favorite plastic astronaut right next to his pillow. He fell asleep instantly, his breathing finally deep and even. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of my mattress. In the dark, the screen of my phone was flashing like a warning beacon on my nightstand. The cheap plastic vibrated violently against the wood. 52 missed calls, 35 from my mother, 14 from Sloan, 3 from my father. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I already knew what they sounded like. My hands were trembling as I opened my text messages. I scrolled through the flood of furious, panicking words. Mom, 10:47 p.m. You ruined everything. Call me right now. The caterer is demanding the rest of the payment. Mom, 10:52 p.m. Sloan is hysterical. Julian's parents just called the country club to cancel the post-wedding brunch. This is all your fault. Call Julian and fix this. Dad, 11:45 p.m. Your mother is having heart palpitations, Riley. You need to come back here and apologize to Julian. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Not a single message asked if Leo was okay. Not a single word of apology for the humiliation they had put me through. They were only bleeding money and social status. I set the phone face down on the blanket. A heavy, exhausting numbness washed over me. Then at exactly 12:02 a.m., the phone pinged with a quiet chime. It was a message from an unexpected number. Aunt Margot. Aunt Margot. Riley. Honey, I am so deeply sorry. I couldn't speak up in that room. Patricia terrifies me, but I can't stay silent anymore. I had no idea they were going to do that speech tonight. But I know they planned it. I'm sending you something. Please know you didn't do anything wrong. 2 minutes later, my screen lit up with 3 picture messages. Screenshots. My breath caught in my throat. I tapped the first image. It was a group chat titled Hudson Family Updates. It was a chat I had never been part of. The dates on the messages were from 2 weeks before the wedding. Sloan, I've been working on my speech. I'm going to call Riley out in front of everyone. Make her see what a disappointment she is. It'll be hilarious. Mom, just don't go too far, sweetie. We don't want Julian's snooty parents to think we're cruel. Keep it light. Sloan, Mom, she deserves it. She shows up with that kid like she's not ashamed of her life choices. Someone needs to put her in her place. Mom, you're right. She's always been an embarrassment. Just make it funny. People love a good roast. Call her a second-hand item. That always gets a laugh out of your father. Aunt Margot. Patricia, don't you think that's a bit harsh for a wedding toast? Mom, stay out of it, Margot. Riley won't say anything back. She never does. She knows her place. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes, and stared at the words until they completely blurred with tears. She never does. They had planned it. They had sat in their beautiful warm house and workshopped my cruelty like it was a script for a play. My own mother had literally fed Sloan the second-hand item line. They hadn't just watched me drown. They had built the heavy stones to tie around my ankles. For 34 years I had been chasing a ghost. I had bent myself into impossible, painful shapes, constantly trying to earn love from people who were fundamentally biologically incapable of giving it to me. I had accepted their scraps and called it a feast. And for what? So they could orchestrate my public destruction as a family bonding exercise. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The tears stopped. A sudden absolute clarity took their place. I opened a new note on my phone and typed 2 words. No contact. There would be no dramatic, screaming confrontation. No tearful phone call begging for closure. I would simply disappear from their lives, taking my son with me into the light. I opened my contacts. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked Sloan's. I blocked my father's. I set the phone down, lay back on my pillows, and for the first time in my life, I slept without dreaming. 4 days later, the trap snapped one last time. It felt like a home invasion, cold and sudden. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital. I was exhausted, my scrubs smelling of sterile wipes. I was walking down the narrow, dimly lit hallway of my cheap apartment building, holding Leo's hand as he chattered happily about a drawing he made at school. I put my key into the deadbolt of my door. "Riley." The voice cracked like a whip in the quiet hallway. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Marching down the faded carpet toward us were my parents. They looked wildly out of place under the buzzing, cheap fluorescent lights of my floor. My mother wore a sharp cashmere coat, her face pulled tight with absolute fury. My father followed closely behind her, his face pale, sweating and desperate. Instantly Leo whimpered. He dropped his drawing and scrambled behind my legs, hiding his face in my scrubs. "Mommy, Grandma looks mad," he whispered, his tiny fingers digging into my knees. My protective instincts flared like a lit match. I stepped squarely in front of my door, blocking their path. "You blocked us," my mother screamed, abandoning all pretense of country club volume control. Her voice echoed off the cheap apartment walls. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Julian's mother. She's a retired state judge, Riley. She called the venue and pulled all their funding. The florist is threatening to sue us for $15,000. Next door I heard the faint click of a lock. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Galloway, peeked her head out, her eyes wide with concern. I looked down at my trembling son. "Go inside with Mrs. Galloway for a minute, baby," I said quietly, keeping my eyes locked on my mother. "Mommy will be right there." Mrs. Galloway opened her door wider, and Leo darted inside. Safe. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. I turned back to the two strangers standing in my hallway. "We are out $200,000 for a wedding that didn't even happen," my mother shrieked, her hands balling into fists. "And Julian won't take our calls. His law firm sent us a cease and desist letter." "That sounds like a terrible financial nightmare," I said. My voice was dangerously low, colder than the ice sculpture in that ballroom. "But it is not my problem. It is your problem," my father snapped, stepping aggressively forward. His desperation was pathetic to witness. "You need to call Julian right now. You need to tell him you overreacted. Tell him it was an inside family joke, and beg him to come back to Sloan. We will lose the house, Riley. We will lose everything." I stared at them. They didn't care about my feelings. They didn't care about the tears their grandson cried. They were bleeding money and social prestige, and they had come to my door demanding their designated scapegoat clean up the blood. "I am not calling Julian," I said, squaring my shoulders. I made myself tall in the narrow hallway. I didn't shrink. I didn't look down. I didn't ruin the wedding. Sloane's psychotic need to humiliate me ruined the wedding. Your decision to call me a second-hand item in front of 250 people ruined it. It was a joke. My mother shrieked, real tears of panicked frustration streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Sloane is devastated. She won't leave her bedroom. She needs intense therapy because of you. Then pay for her therapy with the money you don't have," I fired back. My words hit them like physical blows. My father stepped back, stunned. "I saw the group chat, Mom," I said, letting the final explosive truth drop into the quiet hallway. All the color instantly drained from my mother's face. She froze. "Aunt Margot sent me the screenshots," I continued, my voice steady, cutting through their lies like a scalpel. "I read all of it. I know you wrote that line. I know you planned to roast me for entertainment. You are toxic, deeply cruel people, and I am entirely done with you." My father's mouth dropped open. He looked at my mother, then back at me. "Riley, please," he started, his anger instantly evaporating into a sudden cowardly begging. "I loved you both," I said. The truth of the words ached in my chest, a deep old wound finally being exposed to the air. "I have spent my whole life loving you, waiting in the attic, hoping you'd eventually love me back. But I will not raise Leo in an environment where he learns that abuse is acceptable just because it comes from family." I reached for my doorknob. "Leave my building," I commanded. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The absolute finality in my voice was enough. "If you ever come to this door again, I will have Julian Vance file a restraining order. He offered his services to me for free. Do not test me." My mother opened her mouth, but for the first time in 34 years, no sound came out. I turned, walked into my apartment, and pulled the door shut. The deadbolt slid into place with a heavy, satisfying click. I leaned my back against the cheap wood, slowly sliding down until I hit the floor. I pulled my knees to my chest, buried my face in my hands, and finally let myself cry. But I wasn't crying out of grief. I was crying out of pure, beautiful relief. The poison was finally out of my veins. 10 months have passed since the night I locked that deadbolt and slid down my apartment door. In the ICU, when we finally remove a toxic line from a patient's failing body, they don't stabilize instantly. The machines still beep erratically. The body has to relearn how to pump blood on its own, how to breathe without a machine forcing air into its lungs. Healing is not a peaceful process. It is violent, exhausting, and messy. But eventually the heart finds its rhythm again. Strange how fast a life rebuilds itself when you stop handing hammers to the people who are trying to break you down. I received a promotion at work. Nurse manager of the ICU, without the constant draining emotional vampire of my family's approval hanging over my head. I found a well of energy inside me I didn't know existed. Leo started first grade. He plays soccer now. He makes friends quickly, laughing loudly, thriving without the confusing heavy shadow of a grandmother who looked right through him. I started therapy. Dr. Lowe, a brilliant trauma specialist with a quiet voice and an office that smells safely of peppermint and old books, helped me understand the clinical truth of my childhood. I wasn't unlovable. I was the family scapegoat, the designated emotional dumping ground for my mother's deep narcissism and my sister's hidden insecurities. "Your worth, Riley," Dr. Lowe told me one afternoon, as rain tracked down her office window, "was never determined by their inability to see it. You were just a mirror they didn't want to look into." The video of the wedding, recorded on Caleb's phone on that black tripod, leaked. I didn't leak it. I didn't have to. Julian's furious extended family shared it around, and like a slow-moving earthquake, it made its way back to Savannah high society. The fallout was quiet, polite, and absolutely devastating. My mother was ostracized from her elite country club. Women she had played tennis with for decades suddenly stopped returning her calls. Sloane was put on administrative leave at her prestigious law firm. The partners decided her vicious roast was a massive liability to their public image. My parents tried to do damage control on Facebook. They posted long paragraphs claiming the video was taken out of context and that it was a private family joke. But no one bought it. You can't unsee a 6-year-old boy crying in the background while his own grandmother calls his mother a second-hand item. The truth was on tape, forever. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling no triumph. Just a sad, quiet pity for people who built their entire lives on a house of cards. Aunt Margot is the only family member I still speak to. She visits every other weekend. She walks into my small apartment carrying heavy Tupperware containers full of homemade soup, filling the rooms with warmth and the smell of roasted chicken. She showers Leo with the grandmotherly love he always deserved. One Sunday morning, we were sitting in my cramped kitchen, sipping hot coffee. "I heard Patricia is telling people you provoked Sloane," Aunt Margot said quietly, staring into her mug. "She's rewritten the whole story, Riley. She tells everyone Julian was unstable, and you ruined the wedding on purpose." I took a sip of my coffee. The morning sun was warming the cheap laminate counter. "I know," I said, "and I don't care." Margot looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Family is who shows up, honey," she whispered fiercely, "not who shares your last name." She was right. I am dating again. His name is Xavier. He's a paramedic I met in the emergency bay. He understands the harsh language of my world. The 12-hour shifts, the exhaustion, the smell of sterile wipes. When I speak, he actually puts his phone down. He listens to me, and he looks at me like I am the only person standing in the room. He makes me feel safe. There was one last echo from the past. A few weeks ago, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. It was an unknown number, but I knew the area code. I opened the message. It was from my father. Just 3 words glowing on the bright screen. "I am sorry." No explanation. No long excuses. No desperate request to reconcile or meet for coffee. Just 3 words sent into the void. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator buzzing in my ears. I stared at the message for a very long time. My heart did a familiar painful flutter. The little girl in the attic wanted to text back. She wanted to say, "It's okay, Daddy. I love you." But the mother holding the phone simply locked the screen. I put the phone face down on the counter and walked into the living room to help Leo with his math homework. Maybe someday I'll respond. Maybe I won't. Healing isn't a straight line, and forgiveness is a choice, not a requirement. Julian Vance sent Leo a massive heavy space encyclopedia for his 7th birthday. There was no note inside, no strings attached. Just a beautiful gift from a man who remembered a scared little boy in a space shuttle shirt, and wanted to make him smile. Small kindnesses. They add up. They weigh more than 250 laughing guests ever could. I used to think staying quiet made me strong. I thought that absorbing every insult, taking every hit, and shrinking into the shadows proved my resilience. But silence isn't strength when it costs you your self-respect. Real strength is walking away. Real strength is looking your abusers dead in the eye and saying, "I deserve better." Leo will grow up knowing that boundaries aren't brick walls meant to keep love out. They are doors you get to control. That is my legacy. Not the Hudson family name. Not the Victorian house or the country club. Just a mother who chose her son, and in doing so, finally chose herself. So that is my truth. A $200,000 wedding that became a funeral. Not for a marriage, but for 34 years of trying to earn a love that was never coming. I am sharing the raw intensity of this journey, not for pity, but because stories with this kind of painful depth have a way of finding the exact people who need to hear them. Some of you watching this have mothers who look right through you. You have sisters who compete instead of celebrate. You have fathers who stay perfectly silent when they should speak up. Some of you have already walked away, while others are still sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to find the strength to take that first step. Please know that their inability to love you is not your failure to fix. If the honesty of this story struck a chord within you, if you found a piece of your own reflection in these hard-won boundaries, I invite you to stay connected. By liking this video and subscribing to the channel, you aren't just supporting content, you are joining a quiet rebellion of people choosing peace over poison. There are more powerful, deeply real stories to tell, and I would be honored to have you here for them. If you feel safe enough to share, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to cut someone off for your own peace? Let's remind each other that in the beautiful, messy aftermath of walking away, none of us are truly alone.